Joseph Duggar did exactly what he was trained to do since the day he was born. He followed the Institute for Basic Life Principles rulebook flawlessly, adhering to every single oppressive guideline that the Duggar family built their entire reality television empire upon. According to explosive insider reports that are just now leaking out of Arkansas, when Joseph realised his massive transgressions were on the verge of being exposed, he did not run, and he did not seek secular legal counsel. Instead, he followed the IBLP protocol to the letter. He went directly to the victim's father to make things right privately. This is the ultimate fundamentalist way. Handle everything in-house, sweep the sins under the rug, and keep the secular world completely out of their highly guarded compound. But in a twist of pure, devastating irony, Joseph's strict adherence to this twisted cult protocol was the exact thing that sealed his fate. Because that father did not accept the hollow apology, and instead of keeping sweet, he went straight to the police, resulting in a devastating wiretapped confession. If you are as shocked by this massive megachurch betrayal as we are, and you want to stay updated on every single unfolding detail of this explosive Duggar scandal, you need to press that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. We are bringing you the absolute latest, breaking updates that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch, so make sure you hit the notification bell, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than anyone ever imagined. Now, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal Joseph is currently experiencing cannot be overstated. For decades, the Institute for Basic Life Principles has demanded absolute, unquestioning loyalty from its followers. They teach that the secular world is evil, that law enforcement cannot be trusted, and that true justice is only found within the elder boards of their own secluded church. In return for this blind obedience, the cult promises absolute protection. They promise a fortress of spiritual and financial defense against any outside attacks. But the moment Joseph's wiretapped confession leaked to the public, the very megachurch empire that programmed him to confess privately completely and utterly abandoned him. According to exclusive reports from former church insiders, the moment the news broke, a massive panic erupted within the highest ranks of the IBLP. They instantly realised that Joseph was no longer just a wayward son who could be sent to a quiet, church-run rehabilitation camp in the woods. He was a massive, radioactive liability that threatened to expose the dark underbelly of their entire operation. His desperate attempt to follow their twisted rules of private reconciliation was the exact thing that trapped him in a secular police sting. And rather than stand by the teachings they have forced down the throats of millions, the church leadership cut the cord. This is the ultimate trap moment. Joseph walked right into a law enforcement snare because he genuinely believed the IBLP teachings would shield him from real-world consequences. Insider theories suggest that Joseph was actually instructed by lower-level elders to go to the victim's family, explicitly to prevent a lawsuit that could drain church funds. But when the plan backfired and the wiretapped audio was secured by secular authorities, those same elders completely vanished. They stopped taking his calls. They denied ever giving him that advice. They left him standing entirely alone in the wreckage of his own catastrophic mistakes. This brings us to the ultimate credibility dilemma that has completely paralysed the IBLP leadership. They are currently cornered in a massive double bind of their own making. For years, they have marketed themselves to wealthy conservative donors as a bastion of unforgiving moral superiority, while simultaneously preaching radical forgiveness for the men within their ranks who commit horrific acts, so long as those acts are kept secret. But Joseph's extremely public downfall has shattered that illusion. If the IBLP leadership officially defends Joseph or provides him with the financial and legal backing that they have secretly provided to other disgraced fundamentalist figures in the past, they practically invite a massive federal scrutiny into their own secretive practices. Defending a man caught in a secular police sting would completely alienate their mainstream, deep-pocketed donor base, the very people who fund their lavish retreats, their expansive real estate holdings, and their tax-exempt empire. But on the flip side, by throwing Joseph completely under the bus, they are exposing themselves as massive hypocrites to their most devout followers. They are proving that their foundational teachings about unconditional brotherhood, spiritual warfare, and absolute family loyalty are nothing more than empty marketing slogans designed to keep the flock in line. And according to exclusive insider reports, when forced to choose between standing by their core, professed biblical values and protecting their massive financial bottom line, the IBLP leadership didn't even hesitate. They chose the money, they chose the donors, they chose their tax-exempt status over the life of a young man they spent 30 years brainwashing into submission. The stakes are currently escalating at a terrifying rate for Joseph, both financially and professionally. In the past, high-profile members of the IBLP who found themselves in legal trouble were quietly provided with top-tier, exceptionally expensive legal defense teams. These lawyers, often paid for through hidden church slush funds or wealthy anonymous benefactors within the cult network, specialized in burying evidence, silencing victims through massive non-disclosure agreements, and dragging out court proceedings until the public simply forgot. Joseph, having grown up in this incredibly privileged, insulated environment, undoubtedly assumed this massive legal safety net would be deployed for him the moment he was arrested. But because of the severe PR threat his specific case poses, the IBLP has completely frozen him out of their legal network. Reports from individuals close to the Duggar family's inner circle suggest that Jim Bob Duggar desperately tried to leverage his remaining influence with the church elders to secure funding for Joseph's upcoming Florida felony trial, but he was flatly denied. The well has run dry. The megachurch simply will not risk having their name attached to the retainer of a criminal defense attorney fighting a wiretap confession. This devastating financial blow means that Joseph is being left to pay for his incredibly complex, high-stakes felony trial entirely out of pocket. He is currently draining whatever reality TV savings he managed to hold on to, hemorrhaging tens of thousands of dollars a week just to keep a basic legal team afloat. Without the backing of the massive IBLP network, he is fighting a completely uphill battle against state prosecutors who have unlimited resources and airtight audio evidence. The protective bubble has popped, and the sheer financial terror of facing the secular justice system completely alone is reportedly causing a massive psychological breakdown behind bars. This brutal excommunication isn't just happening behind closed doors. It is happening right in front of our eyes in the most modern, corporate way possible. In a shocking knockout blow that internet sleuths and eagle-eyed Reddit users noticed just hours after the arrest, the IBLP executed a swift, brutal digital assassination of Joseph's entire legacy. Overnight, the organisation quietly scrubbed every single mention, photograph and testimony of Joseph and his wife Kendra from their official websites, their promotional brochures and their highly lucrative seminar materials. For years, Joseph and Kendra were paraded around as the ultimate poster couple for the IBLP lifestyle. They were used in marketing campaigns to convince young, vulnerable couples that total submission to church authority was the only path to a happy, successful marriage. Their faces were printed on thousands of pamphlets distributed at massive homeschooling conferences across the country. But insider leaks claim that an emergency midnight directive was sent out from the IBLP headquarters, ordering the immediate and permanent deletion of Joseph's existence from their digital archives. Webmasters were allegedly forced to work through the night, combing through years of blog posts, promotional videos, and digital newsletters to ensure that not a single trace of him remained. He has been digitally excommunicated. This level of corporate-style PR amputation is unprecedented for an organisation that claims to be a family-first spiritual haven. It proves that the IBLP operates exactly like a ruthless Fortune 500 company in the middle of a massive scandal, cutting off the infected limb to save the host, regardless of the human cost. To the IBLP, Joseph was never a spiritual son. He was simply a brand ambassador. And the second his brand became toxic, his contract was permanently terminated. This entire situation highlights a deeply tragic and profound behavioural flaw that has been conditioned into Joseph since birth: an unwavering, blind loyalty to a corrupt and parasitic system. Joseph genuinely believed his spiritual leaders would protect him from secular law enforcement. He was taught that the outside world is an illusion a temporary test of faith, and that the only true authority resides within the church elders. This fundamentalist brainwashing is so complete that, according to exclusive reports from jailhouse sources, Joseph actually spent his first few days in custody waiting for a miraculous intervention from his pastors. He believed that the church's powerful legal and political connections would quietly make the charges disappear, just as they had done for so many others before him. He utterly failed to realise the darkest truth of the cult he devoted his life to. Cults view their members as entirely disposable the very second they threaten the bottom line. Loyalty is strictly a one-way street. They demand you surrender your finances, your autonomy, and your critical thinking. But the moment you become a PR nightmare, you are discarded like trash. Joseph's complete inability to see this dynamic is the tragedy of his conditioning. He is a man who played completely by the rules of a rigged game, turning himself into a victim's family because he thought it was the righteous, church-approved thing to do, only to be utterly destroyed by the reality that his church was never righteous to begin with. The emotional fallout of this betrayal is spilling over into the digital world, resulting in a completely failed emotional appeal from the remaining Duggar family loyalists. In the past, whenever a member of this massive reality TV family faced even a minor controversy, the Duggar propaganda machine would instantly spring into action. They would take to Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, posting highly curated family photos paired with long emotional captions, begging for their prayer warriors to stand up and fight the spiritual warfare being waged against them. It was a highly effective tactic that usually resulted in thousands of supportive comments, financial donations, and a solidifying of their fundamentalist base. But this time, the silence is deafening. Insider theories suggest that Jim Bob explicitly ordered the family to test the waters on social media by posting vague, coded requests for prayer and support. But those requests are being met with overwhelming backlash, or even worse, absolute apathy. Even the most extreme, hardcore fundamentalist blogs and vloggers, the people who have traditionally defended the Duggars through their darkest, most disturbing scandals, are entirely refusing to rally behind Joseph. The undeniable nature of the wiretapped confession, combined with the IBLP's silent refusal to back him, has signalled to the entire conservative megachurch community that Joseph is untouchable. The prayer warriors have abandoned their post. The emotional manipulation tactics that kept the Duggar family afloat for 2 decades have completely lost their power. The public has finally woken up to the grift, and the refusal of the evangelical community to offer even a shred of public sympathy is a devastating blow to Joseph's deeply fragile ego. At the very core of this entire massive scandal is a glaring, sickening, thematic hypocrisy. This is a religious organisation that bases its entire existence on the teachings of unconditional forgiveness, grace, and absolute family loyalty. They preach sermons about the prodigal son, about leaving the 99 to save the one lost sheep, and about standing firm in faith against the judgment of a secular, fallen world. Yet, when faced with an actual crisis involving one of their most prominent lifelong members, they are practicing brutal, cold-blooded, corporate-style PR amputation. They are behaving exactly like the ruthless secular corporations they constantly preach against. The IBLP's entire spiritual foundation has been exposed as an absolute fraud, designed merely to protect their multi-million-dollar real estate investments, their highly lucrative seminar ticket sales, and their incredibly fragile tax-exempt status. Exclusive, insider reports from whistleblowers who recently fled the IBLP compound claim that the leadership held a massive, closed-door emergency summit in the days following Joseph's arrest. During this alleged meeting, there was absolutely no discussion about Joseph's soul, his spiritual rehabilitation, or his mental well-being. The entire conversation was reportedly focused entirely on liability mitigation, asset protection, and search engine optimization to bury his name from their search results. This is the ultimate betrayal. The spiritual leaders who demanded Joseph's total obedience have reduced his entire existence to a public relations crisis that must be frantically erased from the internet to keep the donation checks clearing. The resulting isolation for Joseph is absolutely absolute, and it serves as a terrifying reality check for a man who has never spent a single day of his life outside the tightly controlled Duggar bubble. According to reports leaking from the Washington County Detention Center, the visitation logs for Joseph Duggar are disturbingly empty. Not a single megachurch pastor, not a single high-ranking IBLP elder, and not a single spiritual mentor has made the trip to visit him behind bars. He is sitting in a cold, concrete, secular cell, completely cut off from the only community, the only support system, and the only reality he has ever known. For a man whose entire identity was built on his status within a highly exclusive, elitist religious group, this level of isolation is psychological torture. He is suddenly entirely surrounded by the secular world he was taught to fear and despise, with absolutely no buffer, no handlers, and no PR team to spin the narrative. The realization that the men he viewed as literal mouthpieces for God have abandoned him to the secular justice system must be an incredibly dark and devastating awakening. Jailhouse rumors suggest that Joseph is struggling severely with the realization that his entire life's dedication was a one-way transaction. He gave the church his childhood, his marriage, his public image, and his complete submission. And in his darkest hour, they couldn't even be bothered to send a local chaplain to check on him. This brings us to the ultimate point of no return for Joseph Duggar. The exact moment his fate was sealed wasn't just when the handcuffs clicked in Florida, and it wasn't just when the wiretap audio was played. The true point of no return was the moment his name was permanently scrubbed from the official church registry. That single, silent, administrative action was the final nail in the coffin of his former life. He is no longer the golden boy of the fundamentalist movement. He is no longer a respected spiritual leader destined to inherit a massive reality TV and megachurch legacy. He has been stripped of his titles, his community, and his carefully curated identity. He is now nothing more than an exiled liability, a man without a country, staring down the barrel of decades in a secular prison system that does not care who his father is or how many Bible verses he has memorized. The IBLP used him to build their massive empire, and the second he cracked under the pressure of their impossible, twisted rules, they threw him to the wolves to save themselves. As Joseph sits in his cell, entirely alone, paying for cut-rate lawyers with his dwindling savings, he is finally experiencing the brutal reality of the secular world he was sheltered from, completely abandoned by the megachurch cult that promised him the world. As the terrifying reality of his absolute isolation begins to truly set in, the financial and legal nightmare swallowing Joseph Duggar whole is escalating to a level of severity that no one in his family could have ever anticipated. According to insider reports and highly guarded leaks from those adjacent to the Duggar family's remaining inner circle, the financial devastation Joseph is currently facing is nothing short of absolute ruin. For a high-stakes, multi-jurisdictional case that involves a massive Florida felony trial, the cost of a competent secular criminal defense team is astronomical. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars just to secure a basic retainer for a lawyer who possesses the actual skill required to fight airtight wiretapped audio evidence. In the golden years of the Duggar television empire, a six-figure legal bill would have been a mere drop in the bucket. The Institute for Basic Life Principles, sitting on a war chest of tax-exempt millions and expansive real estate holdings, has historically functioned as a shadowy financial safety net for its most prominent, scandal-ridden leaders. There are deep theories circulating within former member support groups that the IBLP maintains an entirely off-the-books legal defence fund, explicitly designed to hire top-tier secular fixers to quietly bury controversies before they ever reach a courtroom. But Joseph has been completely, permanently locked out of this vault. Because his massive transgressions leaked to the public and triggered an uncontrollable secular police sting, the church elders have reportedly classified him as a lost cause, refusing to authorise even a single penny for his defence. This unprecedented financial excommunication has left Joseph entirely responsible for funding his own legal battle, and the reality of his bank accounts is allegedly grim. Rumours suggest that the vast majority of the wealth generated during his years on reality television was never actually his to control, heavily mismanaged, or entirely absorbed by the family patriarch, Jim Bob Duggar, under the guise of the cult's strict financial authority teachings. Whatever meagre reality TV savings, Joseph managed to siphon away or hide and now bleeding out at an unsustainable rate. He is reportedly hemorrhaging thousands of dollars a week, desperately paying low-tier, out-of-pocket attorneys who are completely overwhelmed by the state prosecutor's unlimited resources and the devastatingly clear wiretapped confession. Without the massive IBLP network bankrolling a team of ruthless defence attorneys, Joseph is facing the absolutely terrifying prospect of a secular public defender, a reality that is completely shattering his deeply conditioned sense of elitist, fundamentalist superiority. This financial starvation is not just a passive lack of support, it is a highly calculated, brutal strategy of distancing executed by a megachurch that operates with the cold, unfeeling precision of a massive corporate entity. And nowhere is this corporate ruthlessness more evident than in the absolute digital assassination of Joseph and Kendra Duggar's entire existence. The sheer speed and thoroughness with which the IBLP erased them from history has sent absolute shockwaves through the online community. It was the internet sleuths on Reddit, those incredibly eagle-eyed researchers who have spent years tracking the darkest corners of the Duggar empire, who first sounded the alarm. According to their expansive time-stamped archives and Wayback Machine deep dives, it took less than 24 hours after the news of the arrest broke for the IBLP to completely purge their servers. We are not just talking about removing a single recent blog post or taking down a stray promotional video. Insider leaks claim that an emergency, all-hands-on-deck midnight directive was issued by the highest levels of the IBLP leadership. Their IT department was allegedly forced to work through the night in a frantic, sweaty panic, executing a massive digital scrub of decades worth of material. They went into the archives of their highly lucrative homeschooling seminar materials and systematically deleted every single photograph of Joseph. They scrubbed Kendra's lengthy, widely circulated testimonies about the virtues of absolute submission and quiet obedience. They recalled digital brochures, altered promotional PDFs, and completely deactivated any web page that even hinted at Joseph's previous status as a golden poster boy for their extreme lifestyle. He has been completely unpersoned, digitally excommunicated, in a manner so thorough it feels entirely Orwellian. To the thousands of families who currently pay exorbitant fees to attend IBLP conferences and buy their literature, it is as if Joseph Duggar never existed at all. This concrete example of corporate amputation proves without a shadow of a doubt that the IBLP's teachings on unconditional love and eternal spiritual brotherhood are nothing more than a highly profitable mirage. The very second a member's brand becomes legally toxic, their contract is terminated, their legacy is vaporized, and they are thrown directly into the incinerator to protect the megachurch's fragile, tax-exempt reputation. The psychological toll this aggressive, undeniable erasure is taking on Joseph is reportedly pushing him to the absolute brink of a total mental collapse. This brings us to the deeply ingrained, fatal behavioural flaw that has completely destroyed his life: his unwavering, blind loyalty to a corrupt and parasitic system that was designed from the ground up to exploit him. Joseph was born and raised under the oppressive, suffocating doctrine of the IBLPs. Infamous umbrella of authority. This psychological programming dictates that as long as a member remains completely submissive to their parents and church elders, God will provide an impenetrable umbrella of protection against the evils of the secular world, including law enforcement, poverty, and public disgrace. Joseph genuinely, deep down in his core, believed in this umbrella. He believed that his spiritual leaders possessed an almost supernatural level of influence and power. According to exclusive reports leaking from jailhouse informants, when Joseph first realised the secular authorities were closing in, he completely bypassed the option of hiring a real secular defence attorney. Instead, driven by decades of fundamentalist brainwashing, he turned directly to the church's internal rulebook. He followed their twisted protocol flawlessly, believing that if he just went to the victims, Father, to make things right privately, the umbrella of protection would activate, the church elders would negotiate a silent settlement, and the secular police would magically disappear. He was completely incapable of understanding that the secular world does not play by cult rules. His strict adherence to this private reconciliation policy was the exact mechanism that delivered him straight into a wiretapped trap. He walked right into the snare with a smile on his face, entirely convinced that his transparency with the victim's family would be rewarded by his megachurch overlords. He utterly failed to realise that cults view their members as entirely disposable cannon fodder the moment they threaten the financial bottom line. His loyalty was a one-way street, leading directly to a cold, concrete cell. The horrifying realisation that his deeply held faith was nothing more than a liability mitigation strategy for a millionaire megachurch is allegedly destroying Joseph from the inside out. And this internal devastation is only being amplified by the completely failed emotional appeals attempting to be waged on the outside. For 2 decades, the Duggar family has survived massive, world-shaking scandals by relying on their highly weaponised social media presence. Whenever a controversy threatened their reality TV empire, the family matriarchs and patriarchs would orchestrate highly coordinated, deeply emotional public relations campaigns. They would flood Instagram and Facebook with carefully staged, wholesome family photographs, accompanied by lengthy, tear-jerking captions begging for the support of their loyal prayer warriors. These tactics were incredibly effective at galvanising their fundamentalist base, shifting the narrative away from accountability and framing the family as innocent victims of a massive secular witch hunt. But according to explosive insider theories, this legendary PR machine has completely broken down in the day. In the wake of Joseph's arrest, the family allegedly attempted to test the waters, quietly reaching out to their network of allied mega-families, fundamentalist bloggers, and extreme conservative influencers, asking for public statements of support, or even just vague requests for prayer. The response they received was a deafening, terrifying silence. Even the most hardcore, unwavering Duggar apologists, the people who have aggressively defended this family through their most disgusting, unforgivable controversies in the past, are entirely refusing to touch Joseph's case. The undeniable, concrete nature of the wiretapped confession, combined with the incredibly loud, completely obvious silence from the IBLP leadership, has sent a clear, unmistakable signal across the entire evangelical landscape. Joseph Duggar is completely untouchable. He is radioactive. Any family, blog, or megachurch that dares to publicly align with him risks inviting the exact same federal scrutiny and public outrage that is currently destroying him. The prayer warriors have entirely abandoned their posts, leaving the Duggar family screaming into a completely empty digital void. This inauthentic, failed emotional appeal proves that the extreme conservative community's loyalty is completely conditional, based entirely on maintaining an illusion of moral superiority that Joseph has now permanently shattered. The sheer hypocrisy of this entire thematic nightmare is absolutely staggering. We are witnessing a massive religious organisation, an entity that bases its entire multi-million-dollar existence on the teachings of unconditional forgiveness, radical grace, and absolute unbreakable family loyalty, practicing the most brutal form of corporate cutthroating imaginable. The IBLP leadership preaches sermons to thousands of weeping followers about the prodigal son, about leaving the 99 righteous sheep to frantically search for the one who has gone astray. They demand that their followers forgive the most horrific, soul-crushing offences committed by men in power, constantly weaponising the Bible to silence victims and protect abusers under the guise of spiritual restoration. Yet the very second a public, undeniable scandal involving secular law enforcement threatens their pristine, highly profitable public image, they throw their own teachings straight into the garbage. Reports from whistleblowers deeply embedded in the fundamentalist community claim that behind closed doors, the IBLP elders aren't quoting scripture regarding Joseph's fate. They are consulting with high-priced, secular crisis management PR firms. They aren't holding massive prayer vigils for his spiritual rehabilitation. They are holding emergency financial summits to ensure their massive donor base doesn't panic and pull their funding. This is the core moral of this entire devastating saga. The Institute for Basic Life Principles is not a church. It is a highly lucrative, unregulated corporate empire masquerading as a spiritual haven. Their foundational teachings are nothing more than psychological shackles used to keep their followers submissive, compliant, and constantly donating, while the leadership sits comfortably in their tax-exempt mansions, entirely insulated from the real-world consequences of the doctrines they force onto families like the Duggars. Joseph is finally seeing behind the curtain of the great and powerful Oz, and discovering nothing but a group of terrified, greedy executives desperately trying to protect their wallets. Because of this massive systemic betrayal, the isolation Joseph is currently experiencing is absolute, crushing, and entirely unprecedented in his incredibly sheltered life. Reports leaking from the Washington County Detention Center paint a deeply disturbing picture of a man who has been completely broken by his new reality. For his entire life, Joseph existed inside a heavily guarded, fiercely protective bubble. He was entirely surrounded by family members, church elders, and handlers who strictly controlled every single aspect of his environment, from the media he consumed to the people he was allowed to speak with. He never had to navigate the brutal reality of the secular world alone. But now, sitting in a stark, unforgiving secular jail cell, that massive support system has vanished into thin air. According to highly guarded jailhouse rumours, the visitor logs for Joseph Duggar are absolutely barren. Days and weeks are reportedly bleeding together without a single visit from a megachurch pastor, without a single IBLP elder making the trip to offer spiritual guidance, and without a single member of his former spiritual leadership team stepping foot inside the facility to check on his deeply fragile mental state. He is entirely cut off from the only community he has ever known. The silence from the outside world is reportedly deafening, echoing endlessly off the concrete walls of his confinement. He is surrounded by secular inmates, secular guards, and secular public defenders, the very people he was brainwashed to view as agents of pure evil. Without the constant stream of cult reinforcement, the protective, elitist delusion he has lived under for decades is rapidly deteriorating, leaving him completely exposed to the terrifying reality of his own actions. The psychological torment of realizing that the men he viewed as literal mouthpieces for God have completely abandoned him to a system they explicitly taught him to fear is a level of emotional devastation that is almost impossible to comprehend. This absolute, crushing isolation marks the undeniable point of no return for Joseph. The true death of his former life did not occur the moment the wiretap audio was captured by the Florida authorities, nor did it happen the second the handcuffs were tightly secured around his wrists. The absolute, irreversible point of no return was the exact moment his name was quietly and efficiently scrubbed from the church registry by a terrified IT worker in the middle of the night. That single, silent administrative keystroke severed his connection to the fundamentalist elite forever. He can never go back. Even if by some massive, impossible miracle he manages to beat the devastating Florida felony charges, he will never again be welcomed into the lavish, highly exclusive inner circle of the IBLP. He will never again stand on a brightly lit stage at a massive homeschooling conference, preaching the virtues of submission and obedience to thousands of adoring fans. He will never again be the golden boy of the Duggar family's reality television legacy. He has been entirely stripped of his meticulously curated identity, his completely unearned authority, and his massive spiritual privilege. He is now nothing more than an exiled liability, a massive cautionary tale, whispered about in the dark corners of the fundamentalist world. As he sits in his cell, completely drained of his savings, utterly abandoned by his spiritual fathers, and staring down the terrifying barrel of decades in a ruthless secular prison system, Joseph Duggar is finally facing the brutal, uncompromising truth. The megachurch cult that demanded his absolute loyalty, that dictated his marriage, his finances, and his entire worldview, completely and utterly betrayed him the very second he needed them most, leaving him to rot in the ruins of a life built entirely on a massive, highly profitable lie. The walls of the Washington County Detention Center are closing in on Joseph Duggar in a way that transcends mere physical confinement. It is a total, suffocating psychological collapse brought on by the absolute finality of his megachurch betrayal. According to highly sensitive insider reports from sources deeply embedded within the fundamentalist network, the initial shock of his arrest has now fully metabolized into a terrifying, irreversible despair. For weeks, Joseph reportedly clung to the desperate, deeply conditioned belief that this was all just a temporary spiritual test. He was brainwashed to believe that the Institute for Basic Life Principles operated as an untouchable divine fortress. He genuinely thought that the massive tax-exempt machinery of the cult would eventually grind into motion, deploying high-powered, shadowy legal fixers to quietly sweep his massive transgressions under the rug, just as they had allegedly done for so many other high-ranking fundamentalist elites in the past. But the cavalry is never coming. The terrifying reality has finally shattered his heavily guarded delusion. The IBLP is not a spiritual family, and it is not an impenetrable fortress of divine protection. It is a massive, unregulated corporate empire, and in their pristine, highly calculated boardroom, Joseph Duggar has been unilaterally classified as a permanent radioactive liability. To fully understand the staggering magnitude of this thematic hypocrisy, we have to look at exactly how the IBLP leadership is reportedly operating behind closed doors during this massive scandal. For decades, this is an organization that has built its entire multi-million-dollar brand on the concept of radical, unconditional grace and the absolute restoration of fallen brothers. They have aggressively marketed themselves to wealthy conservative donors by claiming to possess the ultimate biblical blueprint for healing broken families. They have stood on brightly lit stages at incredibly lucrative homeschooling seminars, weeping into microphones about the power of forgiveness, demanding that their followers keep their sins entirely in-house to protect the reputation of the church. But, according to explosive leaks from former high-level church administrators, the moment Joseph's disastrous attempt to handle his sins in-house resulted in a secular, wiretapped confession, that foundational doctrine was thrown straight into the shredder. There are exclusive theories suggesting that an emergency tribunal of IBLP elders was convened at their secretive headquarters, and the agenda had absolutely nothing to do with Joseph's spiritual rehabilitation or his soul. Instead, the meeting was reportedly a ruthless, cold-blooded crisis management summit focused entirely on asset protection. The elders allegedly realized that defending a man caught in a high-profile, secular police sting would instantly invite catastrophic federal scrutiny into their own secretive financial and legal practices. It would completely alienate the deep-pocketed, mainstream conservative donors who fund their expansive real estate portfolios and lavish retreats. When faced with the ultimate choice between living out the biblical values they force down the throats of millions or protecting their massive financial bottom line, they did not even blink. They chose the money. They executed a brutal, corporate-style PR amputation, cutting off the infected limb to save the host. This completely exposes the sickening reality that the IBLP's teachings are nothing more than psychological shackles designed to keep their flock submissive, compliant, and constantly writing donation checks. The leadership demands absolute loyalty, but the very second a member's public image threatens their tax-exempt status, they are discarded with the ruthless efficiency of a Fortune 500 company terminating a toxic brand ambassador. This corporate butchering has left Joseph entirely abandoned on an island of his own making, facing a level of isolation that is almost impossible for a normal person to comprehend. You have to remember that Joseph Duggar has never spent a single day of his life outside the suffocating, tightly controlled bubble of his fundamentalist cult. From the moment he was born, every piece of media he consumed, every person he interacted with, and every single thought he was allowed to express was heavily filtered through the IBLP's extreme doctrines. He was constantly surrounded by handlers, protective siblings, and church elders who insulated him from the brutal realities of the secular world. But now, that entire support system has vaporized into thin air. Reports leaking out of the jail facility paint a devastating picture of his current existence. The visitation logs are allegedly completely empty. Not a single megachurch pastor has walked through those heavy metal doors to offer a prayer. Not a single IBLP elder has made the trip to check on his deeply fragile mental state. Even his own massive reality television family is reportedly keeping an extreme, highly calculated distance, terrified that the IBLP's wrath will turn on them if they publicly align with an excommunicated member. He is sitting entirely alone in a cold, concrete cell, surrounded by secular guards, secular inmates, and the terrifying machinery of the secular justice system. The exact world he was aggressively brainwashed to view as agents of pure evil. He has absolutely no buffer, no PR team to spin the narrative, and no protective umbrella to shield him from the consequences of his actions. Jailhouse rumours suggest that the profound psychological torment of this isolation is breaking him in half. He is allegedly realising that his entire life's dedication, his complete submission to the cult's bizarre rules, and his public promotion of their oppressive lifestyle was entirely a one-way transaction. He gave the megachurch his youth, his marriage, his public image, and his absolute obedience. And in his darkest, most terrifying hour, they couldn't even be bothered to send a local chaplain to ensure he survived the night. The absolute silence from the fundamentalist community is echoing off the walls of his cell, serving as a constant, brutal reminder that his worth was entirely tied to his ability to generate positive PR and revenue for the organisation. The financial reality of this abandonment is simultaneously delivering a massive, fatal blow to his upcoming legal defence. Without the shadowy, unlimited financial backing of the IBLP's legal network, Joseph is drowning in the astronomical costs of a high-stakes Florida felony trial. Insider theories claim that Jim Bob Duggar desperately attempted to negotiate a silent financial severance package for Joseph's legal fees, pleading with the IBLP leadership to at least cover the retainer for a top-tier secular defence attorney. But those requests were allegedly met with a stone-cold refusal. The megachurch simply will not risk having a single penny of their tax-exempt funds traced back to a wiretapped confession. Because of this devastating financial freeze-out, Joseph is reportedly draining whatever meagre reality TV savings he managed to hold on to, hemorrhaging tens of thousands of dollars just to keep a basic, completely overwhelmed legal team afloat. He is fighting a desperate, incredibly complex uphill battle against state prosecutors who possess unlimited resources and airtight audio evidence. And he is doing it with bargain basement representation. The sheer financial terror of facing decades in prison without the cult's war chest to protect him is a reality check that is entirely shattering his deeply conditioned sense of elitist superiority. He is no longer a protected prince of the homeschooling movement. He is just another completely broken defendant at the mercy of the state. And this brings us to the ultimate, heartbreaking point of no return. The exact moment. Joseph's fate was permanently sealed, was not when the handcuffs clicked shut, and it was not when the devastating wiretap audio was played in a secular courtroom. The true, irreversible point of no return was the moment his name was quietly, efficiently, and permanently scrubbed from the official church registry. That single administrative action, executed in the dead of night by terrified webmasters at the IBLP headquarters, was the final nail in the coffin of his existence. He was digitally assassinated, erased from their highly lucrative seminar materials, deleted from their promotional brochures, and scrubbed from the sprawling history of the fundamentalist movement he helped build. He has been completely unpersoned. That silent keystroke severed his connection to the fundamentalist elite forever. There is absolutely no path to redemption within the cult for Joseph Duggar. Even if by some massive, impossible legal miracle he manages to beat the devastating Florida charges, will never again be welcomed into the lavish, highly exclusive inner circle of the Institute for Basic Life Principles. He will never again stand on a brightly lit stage, preaching the virtues of absolute submission to thousands of weeping fans. He will never again be paraded around as the ultimate poster boy for the Duggar family's massive reality television legacy. He has been entirely, permanently stripped of his meticulously curated identity, his unearned spiritual authority, and his massive privilege. He is now nothing more than an exiled liability, a massive cautionary tale whispered about in the darkest corners of the fundamentalist world to keep other members in line. The megachurch cult that demanded his absolute loyalty, that dictated the terms of his marriage, his finances, and his entire warped worldview, completely and utterly betrayed him the very second he followed their rules and got caught. As he sits in his solitary cell, completely drained of his savings, utterly abandoned by his spiritual fathers, and staring down the terrifying barrel of decades in a ruthless secular prison system, Joseph Duggar is finally facing the brutal, uncompromising truth. He was never a beloved spiritual son. He was just a disposable asset. And now the asset has been liquidated.